Welcome to Self Up for Life. My name is Paul and this video is all about self-worth. I'm going to cover the differences between self-worth and self-esteem, and also the differences between self-worth and self-confidence. I'll also talk about how most people measure self-worth. That may not be the best way. I'll also talk about the signs of low self-worth, so the typical signs you might notice in yourself or other people. And then I'm going to cover 7 ways to help you increase or improve your sense of self-worth. So what is self-worth? So self-worth is your sense of value, that you value yourself, the sense that you're important and that you're also lovable as well. It's a sense of your innate worth, your innate worthiness as a human being. It's feeling and knowing that you are a good person and that you deserve to be treated with respect. And it's this deeper knowing that you are necessary and important to life and important to other people as well. So how does self-worth differ from self-esteem? Well, they are very similar, and many people often use the words self-worth and self-esteem quite interchangeably, but they are different in some subtle ways. Self-esteem tends to be more surface level. It's more about how we think and feel about ourselves and how realistic that is to life situations. Self-esteem is also about how we believe about ourselves, and again how realistic that is to life situations and our abilities to deal with them. Developing high self-esteem can help you develop a higher sense of self-worth, but it is possible to have too high a level of self-esteem, and this is when you can start to develop narcissism type traits. This is when you exaggerate your positive traits and begin to ignore your negative traits. So unlike self-esteem, which you can have too much of, it's impossible to have too much self-worth. So having self-worth, more of it is always better. Also, self-worth is stable, but self-esteem can fluctuate over time. So it can gradually increase or gradually decline over time. And even on certain days, you might find that your level of self-esteem is higher, or maybe higher for certain types of activities, ones that you feel more confident doing. And this leads nicely on then to the differences between self-worth and self-confidence. So self-confidence is more related to specific areas. So it's your confidence, your ability to do something. So for instance, you could be excellent at a certain sport, but still feel a sense of low self-worth. And actually, this is often why celebrities can struggle. So they can be very good and become famous, but they struggle mentally because they feel that they have a low self-worth inside. However, building your level of self-confidence can increase your sense of self-worth, but only if you build your confidence level in the things that really matter to you and the things that are really meaningful to you. So I'm now going to cover how most people measure their self-worth, and these are not necessarily the right ways. These are just the ways that most people, until they know more about this, would measure their self-worth. So a big one is physical appearance. So basing your self-worth on your attractiveness. So how tall you are, how slim you are, how muscular you are, how attractive you look, the clothes you wear, that kind of thing. And it's about looking attractive and looking physically good, but it's also about the attention you get from other people as a result of this. So measuring your self-worth based on that. A fascinating example of this is plastic surgery. So people go and have plastic surgery to look more attractive, so they feel better about themselves. What's interesting is that for most people that does work, but for some people it doesn't. Even though they look better, they still feel the same inside. And this was something that Maxwell Maltz discovered, and he talks about this in his book Psycho-Cybernetics. Now Maxwell Maltz was a plastic surgeon that became fascinated in why some people's sense of self-worth and self-image didn't change after he'd performed plastic surgery on them to make them look better. And he talks all about this in his book called Psycho-Cybernetics. Really interesting book, highly recommend reading it. I'll put a link to that book in the description below. Another way that people measure their sense of self-worth is through their income, financial assets and material possessions. Now, of course, it's great to have a high income and have all these things. It gives you more choices in life, gives you the ability to have more excitement in life, go on great holidays and things like that. But if you start to base your sense of self-worth on that, Well, then what happens if you lose all of that? And again, this has happened with celebrities in the past where they've lost all that and they've really lost their sense of self-worth as a result. Some people base their self-worth on their social circle, so the people they hang out with. Now, this is an interesting one because if you hang out with people who have a high level of self-worth, then purely by association, your sense of self-worth should begin to improve. But if you feel that your sense of self-worth is based on what people say to you and the kind of people you hang out with, then again, that can be a problem if you don't have access to those friends that say you move to a different area or they move away, and then that can really affect your sense of self-worth. Other people base their self-worth on their type of career. So maybe they think they need to be a doctor or a lawyer because that's perceived in society as a better thing to do, as opposed to, say, being a teacher or a plumber. But someone who doesn't base their self-worth on that is more likely to do a career that's more meaningful and fulfilling to them. And some people base their self-worth on achievements. So these could be sports achievements, academic achievements, career achievements. The problem with these is that these may not always happen in the future, especially with sports. As you get older, you may not be able to continue to achieve things in the way you did in the past. And again, this is common with celebrities. Once they lose their celebrity status and they become less well known, their sense of self-worth was tied to that fame. They no longer have that anymore, so they begin to struggle. So I'm now going to cover some of the typical signs of a person that has low self-worth. It's good to know these because you'll then be able to realize whether this is something you need to work on in your own life or whether you know someone that experiences some of these signs and maybe you can help them. So some of the typical signs of self-worth include self-destructive habits. So this could be drinking too much alcohol, taking drugs, overeating, those kind of habits. Also, excessive people pleasing, so going out of their way to make other people happy, to please other people, again because their sense of self-worth is dependent on what other people say and do to them. It's allowing other people to treat you with disrespect or even be rude to you. So because you're not valuing yourself, you don't stand up to those other people. It can be putting yourself last and putting everyone else first. So going out of your way to make sure everyone else is happy, but at the expense of your own happiness and your own sense of self-worth. It can be feeling uncomfortable accepting compliments from other people, whether those are face-to-face or maybe on social media or maybe in writing somewhere. So when you hear those compliments, you just don't feel that comfortable. It can be having very negative and critical self-talk, so that critical internal voice. Now we all have that to some degree, but when you have that a lot, that can be a sign of low self-worth. It can also be a lack of self-care, so not looking after yourself, so not eating healthily, not sleeping well, and not exercising. Again, if you tend to put yourself last, then you tend not to do the things that will actually help you become better and more healthy as a person. It can be poor diet and poor self-care. Again, if you put everyone else first and put yourself last, then that means that you don't make time, or you might not make time for things like eating well, exercising, getting enough sleep, and having time for you just to relax. Which leads on to not doing the things you love. So not making time for you, not doing the things that are important for you, or doing the things that are going to make you happy. Another sign is staying in an unsatisfying or difficult or even abusive relationship, or staying in an unsatisfying or difficult job, or a job that has a difficult boss. It's not expressing your own needs and asking for those needs to be met. So this can happen in a relationship. It could also happen in a business or a career situation. Say not asking your boss for the kind of things that you might need to do your job better, that kind of thing. And overall, it's a feeling that you feel small and insignificant. So you feel in some way you're inferior to another person, and you feel that other people are more important than you in some way. So now you understand more about what self-worth is and some of the telltale signs of someone who has low self-worth. Let's now look at 7 ways to help you increase your level of self-worth. So the first way is to ditch the external measures of self-worth. So these are all the things I talked about a little bit earlier, things like career, money, your physical appearance. And an interesting one is actually achieving goals. So it's wonderful to achieve goals and improve in all areas of your life, but this won't necessarily by itself increase your self-worth. And the reason for this is that because when you achieve any kind of goal, eventually it becomes normal and familiar. Just think about buying a new car or buying a new house. It's really exciting to start with, but eventually it will just become the new normal. And this is because of something called the law of familiarity. And I've talked about this in another video, and I'll put a link to that video in the description below. The type of job that you do and the income you earn from that doesn't matter. It's much more important that you enjoy what you do, find it meaningful and find it fulfilling. So don't feel you have to be a doctor or a lawyer. If you want to be one of those, that's absolutely fine. But I know quite a few unhappy doctors and lawyers who did that because they just felt that was what they needed to do to have a high level of self-worth. Another one to ditch is other people. Remember, it really doesn't matter what other people think of you. And also, it really doesn't matter what they've accomplished. You know, they could have become a doctor, a lawyer, or a brain surgeon, something like that. They could have married a model and have 5 beautiful kids and 2 Labradors. Again, that doesn't matter if that's not what you want in life. It's not a measure of self-worth. Remember, personal satisfaction and fulfillment is far more important. Another one to ditch is your relationship status and partner. So feeling your self-worth is based on being married and that person has to be absolutely drop dead gorgeous, that kind of thing. So again, ditch that measure of self-worth. Also, what your hobbies and interests are. Some people think that they need to be into a certain type of sports to have a high level of self-worth. And if they have a quirky, geeky hobby, that's going to influence their self-worth. So again, it's much more important that you have hobbies and activities that you find enjoyable to you. And finally, the number and type of friends. So feeling that you need to have lots of friends or friends in high places, a certain social circle to feel a sense of self-worth. None of that is really that important to your self-worth. So here is a wonderful exercise to help you ditch those external measures of self-worth. It's based on an exercise by Adam Sikinski. I'll put a link to his original blog post with this exercise in the description below so you can check that out. But basically, this is my adaptation. Imagine you're on a desert island. So you have no career, you have no money, you have no relationships, and you have no friendships. So on this desert island, you ask yourself, what would I actually have that would be of value? Now, if you find this question hard to answer, that will be because your sense of self-worth is related to the things that you no longer have. If you find this question easier to answer, and I'll give you a clue, the answers are going to be more personal qualities. So they're going to be things like confidence, resilience, curiosity. Then you know that your self-worth is more intrinsic and is less based on external things. So I encourage you to give that exercise a go. So the second one is to realize that self-worth comes only from you. So only you determine your self-worth. No one else does. And believe that you are worthy and valuable, because you are anyway, whether you believe it or not. So you might as well believe it anyway. Self-worth is natural. As a baby, you had an abundance of self-worth. Everyone was running around to make sure that your needs are met. And if any need is not being met in any way, you simply cry or scream and someone will soon come over and sort that out for you. So we're born with high levels of self-worth, but what then happens is life begins to affect and start to chip away at our level of self-worth, and it can begin to decline over time. So number 3 is to conquer your internal critic. Okay, this has a few different names. Some people call it self-talk, inner dialogue. I've heard someone call it the nutter before. It has quite a few different names, but it's that inner monologue that goes in your head that's often very negative. So there's 4 little bits to this. The first one is you want to notice what this internal monologue, this internal critic is saying to you. It might be saying things like, I never get anything done, I'm so stupid, I should just give up. It might be something like, he or she doesn't really love me, it will never last, those kind of things. Then the second part is you want to separate yourself from that inner critic. So one way to do that is to change those I statements to you statements. So I'll never get anything done becomes you'll never get anything done. Or I'm so stupid becomes you're so stupid. I should just give up becomes you should just give up. So you change any I's to you's. And then you imagine that those words are coming from another person. A great exercise, this was one that Michael Singer came up with, is the idea of thinking that this internal critic is like a flatmate, it's like a roommate, something like that. So it's coming from another person. And what's really interesting is when you think of it that way, you realise two things really. One is you'd never ever say those things to another person, and secondly that if someone else actually said those things to you, you probably wouldn't stand up for them. You'd probably want to prove them wrong in some way. The next bit to this is to change your response. So you're now hearing this internal dialogue as if it's coming from another person in the you form. So now you can either challenge it directly or challenge it indirectly. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're hearing "you're stupid." So a direct challenge could be, "Well, I know I'm not. I'm going to prove you wrong." Or more indirect could be, "Well, I know I'm not very good at this, but it doesn't mean that I'm a stupid person." So you're taking away stupid from being a sense of your identity to being, "Well, I'm just not very good at that particular task." So that's a more indirect challenge. And then the last little bit to this is don't act on the inner critic. Although it's trying to protect you and it does have a positive intention unconsciously, it's not doing this in a way that's helping you. So just ignore it and don't act on it. So number 4 is to focus more on your positive qualities, attributes and accomplishments. The problem with people with a low sense of self-worth is that they tend to focus on the negative and they tend to neglect or completely ignore the good stuff. So these questions will really help you reverse that. So the first one is, what are you good at? The next one is, what do you enjoy doing? Or what makes you happy? What are your strengths and talents? What have you achieved or accomplished so far? What challenges have you overcome? What are you proud of? What are your values? And how have I helped other people? I'll list those questions in the description below so you can go through those in your own time. I'll also put those questions in the accompanying blog post, and when that's ready there'll be a link to that in the description below as well. So number 5 is to watch out for perfectionism. Perfectionism causes you to have very high or almost impossible standards. It also can cause you to procrastinate because things seem much bigger and much more difficult than they really need to be. It can also make you feel overwhelmed because tasks take longer than again they need to take, and so your workload just gets higher and higher. So lots of issues with perfectionism, so many I'm going to do a separate video on perfectionism quite soon. However, here are some quick tips if you feel that perfectionism is getting in the way and affecting your self-worth. So you want to replace unrealistic goals with more achievable ones. So just lower your standards a little bit, and also become curious for any new or unfamiliar tasks. So instead of beginning to dread them and just think you need to do them perfectly, just become curious about them. Also lighten up and just bring a bit more humour into your life. That can really help as well. Also appreciate what you did achieve. So when you get to the end of the day, look at all the things you did do rather than all the things that you still haven't done. Also to accept failure, to accept that you will fail sometimes. Sometimes you'll do a piece of work and you'll get criticised for it, but that's okay as long as you learn, get better and grow as a result. Also set a deadline for the task so it can't take longer than it needs to take. Another one is to use external measures of success. So these are things that you can see, hear, feel, taste, touch, so from the senses. So this could be compliments or feedback from other people, or it could be something that's changed within the company. If it's a work thing, for instance, let's say that if your project means that the company makes more money, that's an external measure, or makes people more productive, that's another external measure. Number 6 is inner child healing. Let me just explain a little bit about this. Between the ages of 0 and about 8, we rarely challenge ideas that we hear from authority figures, so such as our parents and teachers. So if a teacher says something to you like, "You're stupid," when you're at the age of 5, you're much less likely to reject that idea. If someone says that to you when you're a teenager, say age 13, someone says, "You're stupid," you're much more likely to challenge that idea. So what happens is before the age of about 8, these limiting ideas can get in and affect your level of self-worth. So what inner child does is it helps you release the emotions from those and change those beliefs. So what you do is you focus on the feeling or the limited idea that seems to be affecting your self-worth. So it might be one of those signs that I mentioned earlier in this video. So for this example, I'm going to use "I'm not lovable." So what you then do is you close your eyes and you just focus on that feeling in your body or the idea behind that feeling. And then you just see where your unconscious mind takes you. So let that feeling take you back to younger days and just see where it goes. So let's say it maybe goes to absent parents, so parents that were always working and you were just at home on your own all the time. So you feel as a result of that I'm not lovable because your parents were never there for you. Or maybe your parents were not very physically loving. Maybe they didn't give you hugs and cuddles, but they did make sure that dinner was on the table at 5:30 or 6 every night, and that they always drove you to the various after school activities you wanted to go to and things like that. So what you then do is connect with that child, and you begin to feel the emotions that the child couldn't feel. And then say the things, and you can do this out loud if you like, say the things that the child couldn't say or didn't know how to say. So maybe express how the child was feeling about the parents never being there, or about the fact that they were not physically loving in some way. And then have a conversation between the adult and the child. So the adult, you could say things like, well, your parents were always absent, but that's okay. They were doing that because they were working hard to make sure that all your needs were met. So they were showing love, just in a different way. Or if they weren't physically affectionate, just say, look, they were showing love, but it was by making sure that dinner was on the table, or by taking you to your various after-school activities. So they were experiencing love. It was just in a different way. So what this inner child healing process does is allows you to express any emotions that got locked inside when you were a child and didn't understand what was going on. It also helps you change the meaning of what's happened, so that when you think about that memory in the future, you have a different meaning and a different belief around it. Now, although you can do inner child healing by yourself, it's often a lot more effective and a lot easier to have someone guiding you through it. And I use inner child healing a lot with my hypnotherapy clients. So if you're interested in me taking you through it, then go to selfupforlife.com/therapy-coaching. So number 7, and the last one, is don't compare yourself with others. When you compare yourself with others in a negative way, and let's face it, do we ever compare ourselves with others in a positive way? Very rarely. What happens is it makes us feel that we lack something. So you see how someone looks and you wish you had the body that they had, or you see how someone communicates and you wish you had that communication skills, or they're really good at that particular sport and you wish you could be as good as them. You can see it gets you focusing on what you don't have, so what you're lacking. Now when you do this, it's not a fair comparison, because all these people have one specific strength that you're focusing on, and there's 5 of them and there's only 1 of you. So it's going to be very hard for you to have all those strengths that person has. So it's almost an impossible comparison. And also remember that those specific things that you admire in those 5 different people, if you had them yourself, they would make you feel differently in some way. Maybe they'd make you feel happier, more fulfilled, more at peace with yourself. Now those feelings, you can have those feelings without necessarily doing the same thing as someone else. You could have some unique skill that could allow you to have that feeling of peace, that feeling of happiness, and that feeling of fulfillment. So rather than focusing on what the actual thing is that other person's doing, that actual skill, focus more on the feeling that you want to feel and look at how you can achieve that by doing something different. And also remember that how someone is portraying themselves on the outside may be quite different to how they actually feel on the inside. So that person that's the life and soul of the party may actually be feeling really inferior and may be using that way as a way of feeling better about themselves. Now we never know how another person is thinking and feeling inside. We can sometimes guess, but even that person that you really admire and is really good at something, they may not feel that good inside. Think of celebrities that have achieved so much in life but are actually unhappy, sometimes quite deeply. So we never know what another person is thinking or feeling. Sometimes I see people that I went to school and university with on LinkedIn, and now they're like CEOs of major multinational companies, so really high paying senior jobs. Now they could be very happy for all I know, or they may be deeply unhappy. I'm probably never going to know unless I actually reach out to them and see how they're doing. So what I recommend you do, instead of comparing yourself with other people, compare yourself with where you are now with where you want to be instead. That's a much better way of comparing. So think about where you are now, think about your goals and dreams, where you want to be in 6 months time, a year's time, 2 years time, 5 years time, 10 years time. And whenever you begin to think about comparing yourself with someone else, instead think about what you want to achieve in those time frames. That's a much more healthy way to develop your sense of self-worth. So now you know a lot more about self-worth. You know much more about what it is, how it varies from self-esteem and self-confidence. You now know how most people measure self-worth. You know what some of the signs of low self-worth are, and you now know 7 ways to help improve your level of self-worth. So I hope you found this video useful. If you did, do give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and do leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. If you have a question, leave that below as well, and I'll do my best to answer it. If you haven't already subscribed to the Self-Help for Life YouTube channel, then please do, and also click the notification bell. That way you will always be notified whenever I release future videos. And do also check out my website, that's selfhelpforlife.com. On there you will find the written versions to most of these videos, also links to my podcast and social media channels as well. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye for now.